Hey everyone, it's Jonathan, and welcome to the final episode of Christmas in July on every version ever. Today I'm joined once more by Dan from TYTD Reviews to talk about more British pantomimes, and this time we're talking about Cinderella. There are so many pantomimes out there that we could have covered, so many Cinderella pantomimes we could have covered, but we discovered two specific ones while we were recording the episode at the beginning of the month, so we decided to come back and do those for the finale. One is 1986's The Shoe Must Go On, and the other is 2000's Cinderella. Both obviously are retellings of Cinderella, but I figured these would be good ones to pair together because there was a big time gap between them, so we could see how much things had changed in that time. And even though they are telling the same story, they are two completely different versions.
Pantomime is an experience. I'll say that up front. Pantomime is is not for the faint of heart. Um, Usually, anybody over the age of about 7 will agree one a year is enough. Um,
I just still can't figure out how I feel about these. Like,
yeah.
they seemed like a mixed bag. Like, parts of it made me laugh and parts of it were annoying.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's generally the over 18 view of pantomimes, which is throughout the year, sort of mums and dads and single people all over the world over the age of 18 will kind of go, oh, you know what, bit of pantomime. Oh, I like that at Christmas. It's nice, it's festive. And as soon as you get your ticket, you're in your seat and they lock the doors behind you. You realise you've made a terrible mistake. And you're just on a roller coaster ride to double innuendos, triple entendres, and Julie and Clary. Um,
I felt like, as I was watching it, I was like, maybe this is better in person.
yeah. Oh, uh, you know what? Kind of. Kind of is the best way to describe it because, on the one hand, you get swept along with all of the very enthusiastic children, and the vibe is very much present in the room, and you can kind of ride that sort of thing. On the other hand, actual theatrical pantomimes usually have a lot more intense audience participation. You can be expected to be pulled up on stage by the Ugly Sisters at least once, maybe. Usually they'll bring water pistols and they'll just start a water fight with the audience, or they'll start tossing things into the crowds, or yeah, it's
I'll sit in the back, the very back.
oh, that won't stop them. I've known panto dames before now run off stage, run out the back of the building, and go up into the balconies and start pulling people down from the second floor. Just chaos, absolute organized chaos, and it's designed purposely that way. The best pantomimes are the ones where they look shambolic and they feel shambolic, but they've actually been very carefully curated to be that way. In fact, one of the first notes I kind of popped on here to sort of talk about with pantomime is, as a format, it's one of the very rare instances where you can have a 10 out of 10 perfect pantomime script, one that's got perfectly crafted jokes, really sort of well-timed sort of pacing on the story beats, really good dialogue, really good character development. But if your cast doesn't vibe with that script, it's a disaster. But conversely, Panto is one of the very few formats where you can have a terrible script with horrendous jokes, awful line deliveries, terrible character pieces. But if you get a cast that kind of can connect into that and sort of steer it the right way, it instantly becomes one of the most memorable and hilarious things you've ever sat through. In fact, it's one of the reasons why stuff like the play where everything goes wrong kind of got its bearings from, because pantomime is kind of notoriously built around, if anything bad happens, we work that into the script and just keep rolling and sort of hope for the best. It's not for the faint of heart. If you're a actor or an amateur dramatics person and they do a pantomime, it can be incredibly nerve-wracking. I personally, I did Amdram for a few years. I always opted out of the pantomimes because it's basically free reign for the audience to heckle you. If you get a line delivery wrong or not quite right, you can completely throw the whole show off. It's too nerve-wracking for me. If I go into just like a straight performance, I can kind of wing it. You can kind of move off stage. You don't expect the audience to start like throwing jokes or heckles at you. But Panto, Wild West of theatrical performances, I would say.
I can imagine. I mean, this was
Mm,
scripted, but it was still chaotic in its own way. Because like
absolutely. And
I'm going into these as like this whole series is about adaptations of certain stories, and like the story that I'm looking for is like 25 to 50% of this, if that.
this is the thing as well. The best pantomimes use the show as kind of the base source to build something better out of. Um, and what we see here with, at least with the 2000 adaptation of Cinderella, is probably one of the most accurate representations of what I would say a bigger budget pantomime was, which is you get 3 to 5 fairly big names in terms of celebrity UK celebrities. You give them their kind of key role and you just let them do their thing. And it just so happens coincidentally to also be the story of Cinderella. Um, it's a rare instance where the person who's playing the part's personality will often usurp the actual plot of the show. A good example in this piece, particularly being a bit later in the Cinderella 2000 panto, Harry Hill plays the Master of Ceremonies at the ball, and he is literally just being himself. It's not a character he's putting on for this show. That is just his shtick. He does that like Monday to Friday as a working job. Frank Skinner, who plays Buttons, again, he's not playing a character. That's just who he is. Um, in some ways, if you've got that sort of personality that kind of connects with the pantomime theme, it's one of the easiest paychecks in the world because you can just turn up and be you for however long and just get paid to banter with the audience and have a bit of a nice time. But again, that's why I say it's not for the faint of heart. If you're not built to have that kind of level of audience interaction, it can be nightmarish at best, especially if you're one of the audience members. Um, because you've then got to deal with like a professional comedian spending the next 2 hours heckling you and your family with innuendo-laden puns and everything and anything that he can think of. And the joy of it is because people expect ever so slight cheekiness with pantomime as well, it means that they can really push to the very line of social acceptability when talking about sexual situations around children, which is just horrendous. And I don't know how they still get away with it, but they do, which is bizarre to me. Um, but yeah, pantomime, the British tradition.
I'm trying to decide which one I liked better. When I first watched these, I thought I liked the 2000 one better. I had a chance to
Mm.
watch the 1986 one again, and I liked it better the second time. So, I don't know. Like I didn't I feel like for most of it I didn't really understand what was going on. I think this is one of the cases where it's a whole bunch of people that I don't know referencing a whole bunch of things I don't get.
No, you see, funnily enough, I had exactly the same problem, but with the 86 one, I struggled more. Um, so I think starting sort of top down on this one, the Cinderella 2000 adaptation, I think is much more representative, as I've mentioned, of the theatrical experience of going to see a pantomime in your city. So if, for example, you live in Manchester or Liverpool or Birmingham, they tend to have one big panto where they get these celebrities and they do their thing. And I feel, barring one or two minor missteps, that that is the more accurate experience of going to a British pantomime and sitting in your seat and watching these performers kind of go through the motions. The 1986 version, I feel, is much more structured like a sort of studio television production, complete with kind of canned laughter and all of that kind of thing. I think the key difference between the 2000s Panto and the 86 Panto, and I'm not sure whether you would have picked up on this one, is that the 2000s Panto fits more in line with the 3 or 4 celebrities who are relatively well known at that time doing the performance. The 86 one was basically let's just hire the entirety of television light entertainment 1979 to 1982. And even if they only have two lines on a walk on, they've still appeared and we can put them in the credits list.
With the 86 one, I think I recognized one person. With the 2000 one, like I didn't know them by name immediately, but they looked familiar, and then I looked them up, I was like, oh, I do know them. I do know that person. I know that person.
I imagine you're particularly happy to see Sian Phillips as the Baroness in the 2000s version because she was Shirelle or Charelle in the Ewok movies.
I haven't seen those. I recognized her as the Red Queen from the 1998 Alice Through the Looking Glass.
Ah, nice,
Yeah,
nice.
she was probably my favorite part of the 2001.
Oh yeah, I mean she was very very solid. The other problem, I suppose, with both of these pantomimes, from an outsider perspective, is there are so many layers of unique cultural humor in
Yes.
references, in jokes.
And they come so fast that I don't know, I don't think I caught half of them.
This is the thing. Like, so for example, Frank Skinner, who plays Buttons, he's best known as a kind of hybrid pundit and comedian. So predominantly he's known for his comedy. He worked very closely with another comedian called David Baddiel, doing a lot of kind of sports-based humor. And his biggest claim to fame is that he teamed up with David Baddiel and another gentleman, and they formed a band for the World Cup in the late 90s, and they did a song called Football's Coming Home, which is why in this pantomime there's loads of kind of little in jokes around Buttons being a football fan and having football
Hmm.
related bits and pieces.
I wondered what that was about.
This is it. Probably the most unique casting in this, or the one that kind of made me sort of go, okay, that makes sense, is Ronnie Corbett and Paul Merton playing the Ugly Sisters. But that's a real deep cut. So Ronnie Corbett was a very, very famous UK comedian. He was paired up with another comedian called Ronnie Barker, who you'll probably know from Open All Hours and Porridge and all of that kind of stuff. He was a initially kind of the very tail end of vaudeville style stand-up comedian and light entertainer. So he's kind of in between the kind of Don Rinkles and Bob Hope style of light entertainer. He sort of sits in that kind of gap. Paul Merton, by contrast, is a late 80s, early 90s alternative comedian, but he's very heavily bedded into the history of vaudeville comedy and musical comedy and that kind of early era. So the kind of, I suppose, the almost in joke, I want to say, or the sort of, okay, I see why they paired them up, is you've obviously paired up somebody who is best known as a modern comedian who's got a very strong affinity for vaudeville and music hall, being paired up with one of the old vaudeville and music hall people. And it's quite a nice, interesting pairing. I don't think they necessarily play the Ugly Sisters brilliantly, but I can at least understand the logic of putting them together.
I liked them better than the Ugly Sisters from the 86 one.
Agreed. Agreed. I think so the problem I had with both of these is what Cinderella 86 does well, Cinderella 2000 doesn't, and vice versa, in
I
my
think I,
opinion
I
at
think
least.
I think I agree because I was thinking about the things I liked from each one, and each one had things that I liked that I didn't like in the other one.
No, absolutely agreed.
Like I like the Prince and Cinderella from the 86 one a lot better than the 2000 one. I didn't really like them in the 2000 one.
No, agreed. And it was an interesting thing with the 2001 as well, is they seem to very heavily underuse a lot of the talent that they had available. So, for example, Prince Charming, Alexander Armstrong, he's paired up with Ben Miller as, is it Daniel?
The sidekick,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Dandini, which
Dandini,
that was
that's the
something I
one.
was going to talk about because there's a Dandini in both versions. And when the 2001 started, I was like, oh wait, so is this just an adaptation of the 86 one? But it wasn't. And I was like, so why is there someone named Dandini? Because I have never come across a Dandini in any other Cinderella adaptations. Same with Buttons. This both has a Buttons. I have never
So
seen
what
that in
you'll
Cinderella either.
No, absolutely. So what you'll find with pantomime adaptations are they are a little bit incestuous. Adaptations of Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Aladdin, Jack and the Beanstalk, they all kind of had their initial drafts of these written probably in the early 1900s. And what happens is different writers will look through these older versions and kind of just cherry pick bits and pieces that they like. So Buttons is generally essential in these adaptations of Cinderella. It's very, very rare that you'll see an adaptation of Cinderella in pantomime that doesn't feature a character called Buttons. And the whole plot is that he's got an unrequited love for Cinderella, and it depends on how they choose to play his character. Towards the end, they'll either have him just kind of accept that Prince Charming is Cinderella's one and kind of step aside and let them get together, or there'll be a kind of Cinderella will make a big point of saying, you know, Buttons, you're my best friend, and I always want you to be my friend, and I'm going to marry Prince Charming, and you can come and live at the castle with me, and that kind of stuff. Dandini isn't as common, but he does turn up periodically, depending on whether the writer wants to use him. Um, Another difference between the 2001 and the 86 one is obviously the 86 one has Cinderella's father in it, but the 2001 chooses to kill him off nice and early. Again, what we're working with Panto is a lot of very hard and fast rules around what will and won't make it in. It really just depends on whether the writer of that adaptation feels like that character can be utilized in a more effective way. Like I say, it all depends. Some characters are really played up, others are really played down. I've known pantomimes that have basically just been like the Dame show, basically, where they take the Ugly Sisters or, you know, the variation of that, the Panto Dames, basically, and just make the show about them. And it's almost like you'll be following these two characters and the plot's just kind of running in the background because the chemistry with the Ugly Sisters is that strong that the writers have just thought, well, I can't really do anything with Cinderella as a character, but I can make these two do, you know, straight man and funny man comedy for the next 2 hours easily.
Hmm. I
So
was going to say, if you get the right person, I could see that working, or right people. If it had been that for the 86 one, I probably would have hated it because I got kind of sick of the step family.
yeah, no, agreed. I mean, realistically, the problem I had with the Ugly Sisters in the 2000s adaptation was I thought that they weren't dressed garish enough, which might sound a bit interesting, but the way that the stepsisters dress and look in the 86 version is much, much closer to how Panto Dames generally look. They usually have these
Okay.
very intricate, extravagant, but very garish and disgusting looking outfits. And they
Well,
always have
they
very
nailed that for the 86 one.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The only thing I think that both of these didn't quite nail though was how bombastic the Panto Dames tend to be. The Ronnie Corbett Paul Merton pairing is very much just that light entertainment brand of kind of a little bit of backing and forth in. The 86 version ups it a little bit, but I don't feel again like they quite managed to nail. The Panto Dames as a rule should generally be very loud, very kind of shrieking, kind of throwing out one-liners left, right, and center. They should be the first to come out with the naughty jokes and the innuendo. They're the ones who, I mean, a common trope with theatrical pantomime productions is throughout both of these, you'll notice the Ugly Sisters were eyeing up any man that came on screen for more than a couple of seconds and kind of, oh, hello, how are you doing? In an actual theatrical panto setting, what will generally happen is one of the Ugly Sisters will lock onto a member of the audience and will spend the rest of the show thoroughly embarrassing them. Just just constantly sort of like kicking their heels and being like, "Oh, hello, how are you doing? Oh, he's strong. I like a strong man. You know what I mean?" People are just recoiling in the seats. They'll normally go for the guy who looks the most kind of tough, kind of. Will just make them quake at the knees, and it's beautiful because the more that they kind of shrink into their chair, the more they do it. It's brilliant. It can be fantastic, but it's like I said at the top of this. Panto is one of those where you remember the fond memories very fondly, less so when you're absolutely soaking wet because they pulled water pistols out and started throwing onions and toilet rolls at you as part of a random parody of the 12 Days of Christmas. Um, I will say this to any of your American listeners. If you ever come to the UK, I do highly recommend you check a panto if you're in the area around Christmas time. It's definitely an experience. It is a culture shock because you think of British people as either quite dry
Hmm.
comedians or very reserved people. Cinderella is our Christmas party. The pantos are our Christmas parties. It's where we let our hair down a little bit and Go
As I
very,
was
very
watching it,
silly.
I was like, this is like the exact opposite of what I like about British comedy, because I love dry humor.
Mm,
And this is like, I'm so used to British comedy being very dry humor, and this is like the opposite of that.
absolutely, absolutely. This panto as a an art form has existed. I'd probably say it's kind of an offshoot of almost Shakespearean theatre. It may go even older than that, realistically. I seem to remember reading an article that suggested that the first few pantomimes were performed in like the late 1600s, early 1700s, but the actual key beats as we recognise them formed in the 1800s. And what we've been watching is more of a modernisation of that. But that kind of humour, up until probably the late 1960s, was the standard. So that was what British humour really was. It was kind of an offshoot merging of vaudeville and old Shakespearean theatre into this ungodly creature of one-liners that take you 5 seconds to actually process what was just said before you can cover your kids' ears. Um, just
There were multiple times where I was like, was that inappropriate? I can't tell, but they're already 5 jokes later, and I'm on to the next thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. Naughty jokes and innuendos are rife in pantomime, and it's designed purposely that way so that the parents get a bit of a break from the kind of screeching, screaming comedy that is a lot more common in this, whilst also hoping to try and fly over the heads of the kids so that it doesn't create any awkward questions.
I mean, the jokes come so fast, I don't think the kids are going to even process half of them. I couldn't process half of them.
No, agreed. And the thing is, it's actually a lot slower now than it used to be. Pantomimes in the 70s and 80s in particular, you had a lot of ex-musical and vaudeville performers who were nearing retirement, essentially using these as their kind of pension top-up. So they'd sign up for 6 weeks to go and do, I don't know, Robin Hood or something. And they'd just do their vaudeville act. They're in costume, they'd put the tights on and the little silly hats, and they'd go on stage and they'd just do 10 minutes of rapid fire, gag, 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 gag. And half the stuff was very, most of them were chronic alcoholics at this point, I'll be completely honest. But the stuff they would say is unbelievable. It would not get broadcast today. But if anything, this 2000 adaptation is significantly slower than it was.
I think that is why I liked this 2001 better the first time, because
Mm,
the 86 one, half of it was flying over my head. It was like, this, I don't understand half of what's going on. They're not doing Cinderella, really. They're using
yeah.
Cinderella as a jump off to do a whole bunch of fully unrelated random bits. Which, now that you're talking about vaudeville, I guess that is why. That makes more sense. But then
Yeah.
watching it again, I didn't get a chance to rewatch the 2001. But watching it again, I think I was understanding more things because I was able to process things I had missed the first time. So I liked it better than I did the first time I watched it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's another thing, I suppose. The 2000s one isn't so much relying on the cast hired to be playing the thing they're known for. Like they do a bit of it, but it's not like they're being hired specifically for a thing, whereas the 86 version is almost entirely linchpinned on you knowing who these people are for the jokes to kind of land. So, for example, the finale with, the Will the Slipper Fit game show. The guy who's hosting that game show, his name is Jim Bowen. He was a household name in the UK through most of the 80s because he hosted a darts-based quiz show. Bet I wasn't turned up on the podcast yet, called Bullseye, where the top prize was a speedboat, which is great in the UK, where it rains 90% of the time, and you're landlocked in almost every other city. It was shot in. It was,
That sounds like a bit. That doesn't sound like a real prize.
genuinely. No, the way it worked was you would answer a quiz question and then you'd be able to, you and your partner, you'd go on as a pair. Your partner would be able to throw darts at a dartboard and you had to get the highest score or you had to get a specific points score. And if you did, you won a prize. And the finale was like a rapid fire quiz where if you hit specific points on the dartboard, you could win specific prizes. And the famous, infamous main prize, the special prize you could win every week if you did win, was a speedboat. But you'd win things like a cassette player or record tokens, or if you lost, you got a tankard and a little stuffed animal bull that was called a bendy bully. I realize I might be, again, to your US audience, I might be sounding like I've just stepped in through an alternate dimension and started fondly reminiscing about some bizarre, but it's true. Another character, Bob Carroll G's, there's a bit where they talk to Basil Brush, who is a little puppet fox whose famous catchphrase is a ha 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 boom boom. He tells a joke and then he does a little laugh.
I recognize that as the thing that showed up very briefly on the Sleeping Beauty one that we talked about.
Mm.
He was a little thing under the cloche.
Yeah, yeah, no,
This was a
absolutely. Well,
much
he's
longer bit here.
oh yeah, well, he's a household name over here as well, and very famous to a particular generation of grown up. He in this gets a meatier chunk, as you say, but when Bob Carroll G's turns up, who is an incredibly obscure name to anybody who wasn't alive between 1978 and 1986, he was a stand-up comedian who had a puppet dog called Spit the Dog, and Spit the Dog's main thing that he would do is spit. That was all he would do.
So the
And
dog was also a famous thing? I thought it was just a
yeah,
bit. I didn't realize that was an actual
no,
reference to something.
this was the thing. They tour, they do comedy gigs and they do like light entertainment TV programs where they'd turn up and he would just be a normal bloke who'd maybe have a little bit of a comedy pattern, that'd be about it. But the whole of his shtick was that Spit the Dog was a naughty dog that would spit on people. And he'd try to start off by being nice and just be like, "Spit, don't do that. That's naughty." And then as it got more and more escalated, he'd get more and more escalated, and that was the whole thing. People would pay money to go and watch him do that for an hour.
That makes slightly more sense because I wondered why did they rig up this spitting dog puppet just for a one-off unrelated gag in what is supposed to be a story of Cinderella?
Britain under Thatcher was a different place. Speaking of Thatcher, she turned up for a bit. That was fun.
I don't think I even realized what they were doing because, like, I know the name Margaret Thatcher, but I don't know much about her other than everyone
Oh,
hated her. And she was the basis of
um,
one of the 80s Doctor Who episodes, like it was making fun of her regime or something.
yeah. So I mean, I suppose on a very base level, Thatcher was to us what Reagan was to US politics at the time, and the two of them fed off each other quite heavily. At this point, doing a Thatcher bit in the middle of a family pantomime is, I felt, a bit glib. Because at this point, the miners' strikes had all happened over here, and there'd been a lot of people who'd lost their jobs, and she'd been doing very heavy cuts to public services. And I think around this time, she was launching what was known as the Care in the Community Initiative, which was basically where they released people who had mental health problems or physical problems back into society after they were in sort of residential care facilities. And she just told the public to look after them and just set them free. And that was how it worked. And it didn't work very well.
I think Reagan might have done something similar. Not exactly that, but I feel like he did something similar.
Mm. The
Like
idea was it was
closing down like mental health facilities.
this was it. I mean, over here we were the mental health. This is a tangent and a half. Welcome to Pantoland,
This
people, where we talk
both of
about
these specials were all made of tangents.
well, right. Okay. Complete sidestep, but this is probably important to know. So in the UK, we had asylums and mental hospitals that effectively were running right up until sort of the late 1970s, early 1980s, and they were horrendous, horrendous places where people were essentially sent and forgotten. There was untold number of abuse cases. It was an absolute terrible situation, and the government were what basically the government was shown a documentary that was shot guerrilla style from inside a couple of these different facilities, where it was revealed that they were basically just people living in squalor, being abused and thrown around. And it's on YouTube, the documentary they were shown. It's called The Silent Minority, and it's a horrendous documentary. Highly recommended if you are feeling too happy. um I need to be knocked down a peg
I
or
don't have
two.
that problem these days, so I'll avoid it for now.
Yeah, yeah. But essentially, they were showing this documentary, and they're like, "Oh, well, we can't let this be. We've got to kind of fix it." So they sent out some tenders to find out how much it would cost to, one, rebuild these facilities so that they were up to code, and two, hire enough people to kind of care for them. And they were left with a decision of we can either close a significant chunk of these because we can't afford to rebuild them, or we can put the country into a national debt, fixing these facilities and making it suitable for purpose. And what they settled on doing was a hybrid approach, which was they fixed some up for people who literally could not function out in society, and then they created this care in the community thing where they just basically took all of these people who had been locked away probably for anywhere between 2 and 20 years and just said, right, go home. And some of them didn't have homes, and the public were just informed to look out for your neighbour and to be nice. And in principle, in a utopian society, that would be really lovely. You know, you'd check on your neighbour, make sure they had food and water. But unfortunately, that didn't work. And we ended up with the current crisis we have, which is facilities like that are, again, falling into ill repair. And people are really struggling to make ends meet. And there's a mental health crisis. All of this to say that in 1986, putting Thatcher in a crown in bed and making her out to be Queen Charming seems a little inappropriate because this was probably at the point where she was maybe the least disliked. No, most disliked. I don't know. I know the writer of this was Barry Cryer, who was a very old-style writer. Again, popular mainly during the vaudeville era. It would not surprise me if he had a particular passion for Mrs. Thatcher, so...
Well, I will say the one of the jokes that made me laugh the most was when she got hit by a ton of lettuce or whatever that was thrown at her, and she was like, "Oh, less than yesterday. I must be getting more popular." And at that point, I had no idea that was supposed to be Margaret Thatcher. So
it was a nice touch. It was a nice touch. But again, that's the thing that blew my mind with the 80s version is so many famous people turn up and maybe get like 2 lines and then disappear.
yeah, I was waiting for them to come back because they were supposed to be the prince's parents, and I was like, okay, well, what happened to them? But then, as I was watching it again, I was like, okay, there's a lot of people that just kind of show up and then leave. So I guess that was the bit for them.
This is it. Les Dennis and Roy Walker are another two. They turn up as like the... So one thing that happens in both pantos is they do a play on the Laurel and Hardy wallpapering sketch.
I was wondering what that was about. I was like, why are both of these movies stopping in the middle to have a weird random redecorating scene?
So in a theatrical environment, that would be the excuse for them to get the buckets of water out to start throwing over the audience, or to appeal to the very younger kids by getting both of the main panto dames covered in custard or shaving foam or whatever it is they were using on set. But that particular sequence is essentially just a reworked version of a very old Laurel and Hardy routine. And I only know that because
in the 86 one, it fully turns like into a black and white silent comedy.
Yeah.
I was like, this is bizarre. I was like, this is a reference to something that I don't understand.
Yeah, no, it's a clip it's on YouTube. I remember I went to years ago, I went to see a theatrical performance of the life of Laurel and Hardy, and it was kind of split in half, and half of the show was them kind of talking through their lives and how they grew up and got into comedy, and the other half was their most famous sketches kind of reenacted live on stage. And they did exactly that sequence. There's a couple of gags that are cut out for time, but otherwise it's essentially just a cribbed version of a Laurel and Hardy routine. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if the writer for the 2000s version had seen the script for the 1986 version, which is probably where I should jump into talking about the writers. So like I say, Barry Cryer was a quite famous comedian in the 50s through to the sort of late 80s, early 90s. Very light entertainment kind of person. He usually wrote for other comedians, but he was quite well respected in his own right as being a bit of a comedy genius in the UK. He was mainly known for writing for people like Russ Abbott, who again was a very popular comedian in the 80s, but he did have his own kind of stuff. And he worked very closely again with Paul Merton, which are these comedy connections coming in because Merton, obviously a big fan of that era of comedy, and the two of them were quite good friends. Also, that's the reason why Rory Kinnear is in this. Veruca Salt's dad is in this.
That was the one person I recognized.
Yeah. Him and Barry Cryer were very, very good friends, which is why he's in this.
Okay.
Because Cryer basically hired him. But the 2000s version of Cinderella was written by Simon Nye, who has a lot of connections to your podcast, John, surprisingly. So probably first up is that he wrote Flushed Away, which you'll probably know as the Aardman film.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. His other one that is a bit of a connection to the podcast is he helped supply a big chunk of material for the 2020 Grinch musical.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The
So there's that.
beloved 2020 Grinch musical that NBC has tried to scrub from the internet.
I have printed every frame off on A4 paper and stuck them on all of my walls of my house. Um,
I'm still surprised I managed to find a copy for us to watch, and then it disappeared right after I got it for us to watch. They're all over it. They really don't want that thing to be seen.
well, I'm so glad that you stood up to the television studios and firmly proclaimed, no, I have earned my right to watch a subpar musical featuring a green man.
I will probably never watch it again, but I'm glad I watched it once.
Yeah. In that case, once was enough. Who could have thought? Um, probably the two best things that Simon Nye has written was he wrote the Doctor Who story Amy's Choice, which was probably one of the better Matt Smith era stories in my opinion. And his biggest claim to fame was that he wrote a comedy series in the UK called Men Behaving Badly, which was a 90s sitcom that was very kind of oriented around lads culture. And it was about two guys in their kind of late 20s, early 30s, kind of learning to leave that kind of roughhousing 20s era behind and embrace adulthood. And even though they were getting older, they were still behaving badly, and that was kind of the whole shtick of it. But he also did a lot of these pantomimes. He wrote pantos for ITV between 1998 and 2003, including an adaptation of Jack and the Beanstalk, an adaptation of Aladdin, and an adaptation of Dick Whittington. And he very likely was able to access materials from previous pantomimes that had been produced by ITV, because even though the 86 version of Cinderella opens with a logo that says Central, this is going to get very meta very quickly, by the way, so apologies. um, even though the 86 pantomime opens with a logo that says Central, Central was in fact the Midlands region variant of ITV. So up until, I think it was 2001, 2002, ITV had franchises. It wasn't just a television channel. So what would happen is different television companies all throughout the country would offer tender for the right to broadcast on ITV's frequencies. So in Yorkshire, they had a television company called Yorkshire Television, which broadcast under the name of ITV right up until the late 90s. In the Midlands, Central TV ran up until the 2000s. In London, they had LWT and Thames Television. So essentially, I wouldn't be surprised if Simon Nye was able to access older ITV adapted scripts, saw Barry Cryers, and just half-inched chunks of his script into his newer works.
I guess that makes as much sense as any other explanation I could come up with, because I thought it was just the most bizarre thing when I watched the first one and they stopped the movie for this random crazy redecorating scene. And then it happened again, and I was like, what am I missing?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that actually leads me on to another thing that is a bit odd about both of these pantomimes, and it's not necessarily accurate to the actual going to a theatrical experience. So the 86 Cinderella, I feel, is too reliant on musical numbers.
And it wasn't just musical numbers written for it. Like, they had, like, Wind Beneath My Wings and a song from Annie. And I was like, what is happening? I was not expecting this.
This is the thing, and this is why it's so interesting. So part of pantomime culture, at least in the theatrical capacity, is songs are prominent. Songs are featured in basically every pantomime, whether you're a small, like, local community Amdram putting one on, or whether you're like the city's main pantomime. You'll have musical numbers.
Which I was expecting that. But I was expecting them to be, like, written for this movie. I was not expecting them to drop in Annie.
Well, this is the thing. So in theatrical pantomimes, generally those songs will largely, and I would say 75% of the case, be either popular tracks of the day or sort of main sort of classic hits type songs. So it's not entirely inaccurate, the 86 version, to do Wind Beneath My Wings and things like that. you could fully expect Cinderella to maybe use songs from Annie or, stuff from, I don't know who a modern singer would be, I don't know, Billie Eilish or something, would turn up in these pantomimes. What is more common is for them to do parody versions, because that means that they can then circumvent UK copyright law. So in Sleeping Beauty, you may have the lion sleeps tonight, but they'll change it to the beauty sleeps tonight or something like that. And that's just enough for them to be able to put that song in their panto and have people recognize it and kind of tap along without having to pay anybody royalties. The reason why it's unusual in the 86 version is I think they top load the music too much. And the reason for that is because the lady playing Cinderella was a very popular singer at that time. She was part of a band called Bucks Fizz, who famously won Eurovision for the UK in 1982 with the song Making Your Mind Up. Basically, I think what happened was they hired her because at that point, 85, 86, Bucks Fizz were just starting to kind of fall out of popularity and they could probably get her for a good price. And they sort of thought, well, she's a singer, that means we can put lots of songs in it. Whereas what's odd about the 2000s Cinderella is they do songs, but they're all originally written songs. They're not parodies or actual pop songs of the time, which is unusual for pantomimes because generally they tend to do more sort of sing-along type songs, stuff that the audience can kind of get up and get involved with. In big caps lock letters under both of these reviews I've just written, audience participation is mandatory. And that's kind of what this is. The whole shtick of a panto is you go to them to get involved. You can't be a passive panto viewer, unfortunately.
I want to go to one, but you're making it sound less enticing when you talk about people being approached by people who won't leave you alone and having to participate and getting soaked. And I'm like, this sounds the opposite of what I want to do if I go to a theater.
Well, so here's the thing, and you've unlocked a core memory, John. Thank you so much. A couple of years ago, they tried to change that. And it got swept up in this whole culture war, rambly nonsense that I don't understand. So basically, a handful of pantomimes in the UK blanket agreed that what they were going to do is put on two different types of performances. They were going to put on the full-scale pantomime, all bells and whistles, dragging your nan onto the stage to do the Macarena and all the bits in between. But then they were also going to do what they called, I can't remember what the exact wording was, but it was essentially a safe space version, which is what would happen is at the start of the show, rather than just going straight into the show, all of the characters would come out on stage and they would talk to the audience, kids specifically, to say who they were, what they did. If there was any scary moments that were involving them, they'd say, now this scary moment's coming up, just so you know, so you're not scared when it happens, but don't worry, I'll be okay in it, and we'll all get through, all in character as the people they're playing. So the Wicked Step Queen would turn up and would actually talk to the audience and say, well, I'm the Wicked Step Queen, and I'm going to do this scary thing and this scary thing. And I may be evil, but I'm not that evil when you get to know me, sort of, that sort of reassuring the audience that they're all right people. They do other things as well, like tone the amount of flashing lights or sort of striking imagery out of the panto so that people
I
who have
noticed they were doing a
or...
bit of this in the 2000 one, like warning about flashing lights and like talking about. I assumed it was for the kids, like warning the kids about evil things and stuff like that.
Yeah. To be honest, I noticed that and I thought it was a really nice touch because a lot of pantomimes don't tend to do it. But like I say, this safer version of the show was aimed for people who had disabilities or people who didn't want to be dragged up on stage or made to do things they didn't want to do. So they cut out all the audience participation stuff. They toned down the lighting. They toned down the talking to the audience as much. Or if they do talk to the audience, it's more friendly rather than... rather than trying to coax people into a response. And the newspapers over here went absolutely mental about it. They started like accusing these companies of ruining the tradition of pantomime. And I'm like, what, the tradition of traumatizing your children and getting absolutely soaked every night? No, I don't get it. It's one of those things where I don't understand why somebody would be against it because it's not like they're stopping the actual show They're just saying, hey, if you don't want to be dragged up on stage, made to wear a frilly dress and forced to dance to the 12 Days of Christmas with a pantomime dame, um, go to this show instead of this show, you know. But people can be weird like that.
They probably do it for the same reason that people make 1,000 angry videos about one piece of news about Star Wars that they don't like and try and turn it into a huge controversy.
Yeah, probably, probably.
Outrage sells, unfortunately.
Basically. But I like the fact that they do offer that because one of the things I didn't like about Panto as a kid was the idea that at any moment some strange sweaty man in makeup could pick me up, drag me onto the stage, and make me jingle a bell every time he said the word whooper or something. I don't want that. I don't
That
like the
sounds like
unexpected.
childhood trauma in the making.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like there was one I went to years ago, and I've referenced it a couple of times in this cast already, but they did like a version of the 12 Days of Christmas, but it was Snow White related. So rather than it being, two turtle doves and a partridge in a pear tree, it would be something like two sleepy dwarves and a beauty as fair as could be, or something like that. But for every one of the 12 days, they went into the audience and grabbed somebody up and gave them a prop and basically told them, when we say this bit, you have to throw that prop at the audience. So, like, they got this little lad who'd got, I can't remember what it was. I think it was like pom-pom balls. He got this big bag of pom-pom balls, and every time they got to the last one of the days of Christmas, he'd have to lob it. And he was there for all 12 days. He had to just keep throwing these. And the Danes would get increasingly upset with him that he wasn't throwing them fast enough. Just chaos.
Is this the
Absolute
basis
chaos.
for that bit in the middle of the 86 one where they had one of the stepsisters banging a drum whenever Dandini said a number? Because
Yes.
I was like, what
Yeah.
on earth is this supposed to be?
Yeah. So moments like that, they would normally get an audience member up to take part.
Okay,
Um,
that makes
that
sense.
audience member would not be mic'd up either because you give a grown up a microphone at a place where they're told to be silly and they will probably say something they regret.
Uh,
But yeah, it's a good one. I mean, for me, I think the 2000s one captured what you would get in a Panto experience more, which is why I liked it more. The 86 one, I got about halfway through it and then started to feel a bit like, okay, this isn't going anywhere, and a lot of the jokes are so unique to 1982 to 1987.
that's how I felt. It was like, I don't understand half of this.
Yeah. Basically, unless you were kind of an older kid or a younger teen or older between 1982 and 1987, a lot of the jokes and the one-liners that they did in that show just will make absolutely no sense.
Hmm.
Like in the opening, there's a bit where they talk about Prince Charming and they say that they bet he drinks Carling Black Label. That was an advertising campaign that ran from 1984 to 1986 and was very popular in the UK at the time. But if you were born after 1990, you have no clue what that is. Loads of just random references to like political events that were happening that year. It says to me that they didn't really plan on repeating that pantomime, that it was very
That
much
was
going to be
how
sort of
I,
like a one-off broadcast.
yeah, that's the feeling I got. I was like, this doesn't, like, it was made sort of like a movie, but it didn't feel like something that they planned on having be like a yearly tradition. Like, we play this every year. It's like, this was
Yeah.
made for this one time. They weren't thinking about people watching it 40 years in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And I also feel that the way they shot it, having that more studio television feeling to the 86 version, kind of loses a bit of the atmosphere. Like, I know that the 2000s version doesn't really heavily rely on the audience as much as more typical pantomimes would, but them cutting back to the audience for reaction shots, having the audience participate a bit more with actual shouting and screaming and stuff like that, I feel kind of gives it a bit more character, brings it to life a little bit more, whereas a lot of the humour in the 86 version feels a bit dull because the audience is clearly not there, that it's canned laughter, which to me I don't think feels as natural or good as actually having the audience there laughing at the jokes.
Part of me was like, audience laughter supposed to be a joke? Because I was also kind of confused by the audience laughter. I didn't realize, I didn't know if it was supposed to be part of it. Like, I wasn't thinking of this as like a sitcom. And I don't,
Mm.
for part of it, it seemed to come out of nowhere. And I was like, okay, what am I missing here?
It's difficult to say because 86 was slap bang in the middle of the sort of alternative comedy revolution, that period of time where a lot of the sort of self-aware, sarcastic, drier comedy that Britain is known for was kind of in its element. You had a lot of people like Rick Mayall, Ade Edmondson, Alexei Sale, Ben Elton, who were all very prominent members of the alternative comedy community, sort of in their prime around this time. You could read it as both ways, but because the fact it's Barry Cryer writing it and he was very much more of an older soul in terms of comedy and how it functions, I could see people saying, well, the audience laughter is clearly pumped in to be a joke in and of itself. But it honestly wouldn't surprise me if the production crew just decided, I'll just slap some laughter on there and it'll be fine.
That's probably what it was. There was just moments where just was wondering if it was there purposely because it was supposed to be funny. But it, like what had been said, didn't read to me as being funny enough to elicit this much canned laughter. So I
Yeah.
didn't know if that was the joke or not.
It's weird as well because that canned laughter in a theatrical environment, you get a much rounder, broader laughter range. The canned laughter in the 86 version feels like they put four people in a room and told them to laugh in a microphone, which is bizarre when you're trying to create that kind of theatrical vibe. And the amount of people laughing in your canned laughter just isn't that much. It's surreal. It was a bit. There were just moments in this where I wondered what they were thinking they were doing with it because I know that they could get broader, grander laughter or reactions because they'd done these kind of pantomimes for years. When we were in our previous podcast talking about this, I think it was after the show, I sent you links to 24 different recordings of pantomimes that had been done by the BBC and ITV going back to the 1950s. So they could have sourced reaction stuff from those, and it probably would have been if anything more effective. So I just can't get my head around why it was so stripped back because it just makes everything feel a little empty as a result.
Yeah, and maybe the off quality of the sound of the laughter is why I also was confused as to what it was there for.
Mm,
Because it didn't
no,
feel
absolutely.
genuine enough to be like an actual laugh track.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So yeah, I realised we kind of went off like a Roman candle there. We we didn't so much hit the ground running; we hit the ground exploding. Um, I liked Julian Clary as the good fairy in the 2000s version. I thought he was really good.
When he came on, I was like, is this supposed to be? And that I realized that the timing was wrong, but I was thinking of him as a cross between Eddie Izzard and Caesar Flickerman from the Hunger Games.
In fairness, comparisons to Wizard have gone a long time with him because they both kind of started in comedy around the same time. A very interesting casting for Julian Clary, particularly at this point in his career. He is a very adult comedian. He predominantly uses kind of sexual humor as his jokes.
He was kind of towing the edge there a bit. It felt like he was holding back because it was supposed to be for kids, but like you said, wondering how people got away with it, I think it's because he didn't quite go over the line to make it actually filthy. Because I
Mm.
noticed some things that he was saying was like, this wouldn't fly in a kid's show in America.
No, no. Well, this is it. It's an interesting time for him to be doing this of all things because I think it was 2 years prior to this appearance, he was at the ITV Comedy Awards, which was basically like the BAFTAs but for comedy. And I don't know if it still goes, but it used to be like a televised event. And he infamously made a very rude sexual joke about the finance minister at the time, who was in the audience, I believe, possibly. But it's yeah, it's an interesting choice to put him in this. The closest I can imagine in the US would be if they decided to do a kids play and they hired John Waters to play the fairy godmother or something like that.
Mm.
Like, it would certainly raise some eyebrows. Or, I don't know, maybe RuPaul or something like that. An interesting choice. But I liked him. I thought he was very good. In fact, I don't think there was anybody I particularly disliked in the 2000s version, apart from possibly the actress playing Cinderella. I thought that she was just a little bit beige.
Yeah, I would say that if I had to pick a least favorite, it would be Cinderella, which is
Mm.
kind of sad because she's the title character.
Yeah. But that's the joy of Panto, you see. It's they use the fairy tale as the base, and then they just build off it.
Mm.
It's like I say, they can absolutely fail to realize Cinderella in an effective way, but if the cast is funny enough and can hold your attention long enough, then they've technically still won. It's a weird dynamic in the world of Panto.
Yeah, it was odd. Like, it wasn't bad. It didn't turn me off of pantomime. Neither of these did, but it made me
Hmm.
feel like I think I need to see some more to get a better idea because, like, it was very much a mixed bag.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I can tell you, like I say, I know ITV have done various televised pantomime adaptations over the years, and Simon Nye has written a good three or four of those. I think some of them are on YouTube, although they wouldn't necessarily fit into your every version ever. I don't know whether you've done Dick Whittington or.
The Dick Whittington one kept coming up, and I was thinking to myself, maybe I should do that one just to do it, like maybe around Christmas.
Hmm.
Just to do it because we talked about it before. Like I have no idea what Dick Whittington is. I had no idea that it was a story that went back centuries. It's not something I'm familiar with. And
Yeah.
because it's a pantomime staple, apparently, I feel like that would be the best way to start looking into what this
Yeah.
story is.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the three big hitters, the three that always without fail get put out during pantomime season are Cinderella, Dick Whittington, and Aladdin. Snow White usually gets a run out, Sleeping Beauty usually does as well, but those are the three where you can guarantee somewhere in the country somebody's doing one of those adaptations. It all depends on, like I say, who is adapting it and who the cast are, because unlike any other media format, when somebody does an adaptation, they generally try to be faithful to the source material. And Panto's one of the very few exceptions where they'll just go, yeah, sure, let's do an entire Beatles parody in the middle of Snow White. Why not? Why don't we just do Yellow Submarine for 20 minutes? The lead cast member needs a cup of tea and to put her feet up for 20 minutes. Yeah, let's just do the Beatles for half an hour, or, let's turn it into an episode of the Banana Splits or something. They don't, it's a weird situation where they don't treat it with respect, but everybody's kind of okay with it. Because it's like, well, we've seen the actual story so many times. Let's see what you can do differently.
I can't imagine, not knowing a ton about pantomime yet, but I can't imagine going into a pantomime hoping to see the story treated with respect.
No, no. Well, the thing is, though, and it tends to happen in posher areas. They won't do panto, dear. They'll do theatrical adaptations, which is at Christmas, they'll do a theatrical adaptation of Cinderella, and it will literally just be Cinderella. They'll do Snow White and it will just be Snow White. But
Hmm.
that tends to be more for the artsy crowd, the people who don't want the sort of farce nature of pantomime getting in the way of their story. I don't really know who would want to go and see that particularly if you're going for sort of festive vibes, but they do pop up from time to time.
I mean, I probably am, I probably lean more towards the artsy crowd. I probably would like that, but I feel like there should be some sort of a hybrid because, like, watching these, I was looking for the story because, like,
Mm,
that's the point of the podcast. I like different versions of the story, but it just went so far off the rails sometimes. So I feel like there should be like a happy medium, something that's like trying to do a more artsy version, but it's also irreverent and ridiculous. I don't know.
oh yeah. No, agreed. Agreed. I think that finding a nice middle ground where, you don't have to fear for the quality of your trousers, um, but you can also have a laugh would be nice. It would be nice. And again, it depends really on that's one of the only downsides of pantomime culture is you don't know what you're getting into until you're into it. Because pantos change every year, theatre troupes change every year. The quality of who writes what and what scripts are being adapted to what change literally from company to company. I mean, from my own experience, the way that it's worked up to now is that you go and try out different theatrical troupes. You find the one that did a good job, and then you stick with them until they do a bad job, and then you find somebody else. It's not as straightforward as just kind of looking through the listings and going, "Oh, they're doing Snow White. Right, let's go see that." Because, like I say, it lives and dies by its cast.
Hmm.
And the only thing worse than being trapped in good panto for 2 hours is being trapped in bad panto for 2 hours. Um, because if they're bad and they can't save it, oh god, it's nails on a chalkboard. For 2 hours, you are hostage, unless you want to leave during the interval, which you're perfectly in your rights to do. You know, they're not
I
going to
can
make you
imagine
stay,
because
but
like the first time I watched this, if like I said, if it had been only the Ugly Stepsisters, it would have gotten old quick. But like
mm,
there was enough that it kept bringing me back around because like I liked all the musical numbers. I think that's why I liked it even more on the second time around because I liked the music so much more than in the 2000 one.
yeah, the 2000s music was very dry. I felt it wasn't bad. It was just kind of very unremarkable.
It
It
was kind
was
of there. Like I'm struggling to even think of what the music was like in the 2001, partly because I only watched it once. But
yeah.
even if I'd only watched the 86 one once, I could still tell you that they did Wind Beneath My Wings and the whole Tomorrow song from Annie. But I liked the performance of Wind Beneath My
Mm.
Wings. And like one of my favorite parts, probably leaning into me liking the more artsy stuff because it was such a cool choice, was to blend in the chiming of the clock to the end of the song. And as the song is ending, it's like turning into that. And I was like, that's a cool idea. I really like that.
Oh yeah, no, completely agreed. And I think the 86 version, so the 86 version has the luxury of that studio environment, which means they
Hmm.
can, and retakes, which means they can be more creative in their execution. The way that the 2000s set is set up is very much how most typical ones will be set up if you go to a theatre. The two-tier, top floor and bottom floor of the Cinderella set is a bit unusual, but
I
that's because they
liked
had
that
television.
though. I was like, that is a really cool idea.
Oh, agreed, absolutely agreed. And I think the reason why they had that was because they had ITV money behind them.
Mm.
Usually, a lot of these other companies are kind of individually contracted. So what they'll generally do is have some kind of rotating set where when a scene ends, the background will literally just rotate around, or a different screen will drop behind them to set up a different scene,
I
and
kind
you'll
of
have sort of
assumed they
stagehands run
must
out.
have been doing that at some point because, like, the one part of the set gets trashed when the stepsisters are quote unquote redecorating. I assumed that they were changing it out somehow. Because, well,
Yeah,
part of me was like, are they filming this in one shot and they're using this scene as a way to get everybody changed for the next scene? But then, like, after that scene where everything gets trashed, the stepsisters are a mess. Like, 2 seconds later, the stepsisters are fine. So I was like, okay,
yeah.
well, that's not the case. It wasn't filmed in one shot. So again, I was back to, well, then, what was the point of this redecoration scene?
To be honest, when they do that normally within pantomime, what it means in sort of behind the scenes terms is that there is going to be a big set piece coming up and they need filler so that they can get the
Uh-huh.
stuff set up behind the scenes ready for whatever's coming in the foreground. I don't know why they did it with the televised pantomimes because they can literally just, as I mean, it's illustrated a couple of times in the actual panto itself. They do stop recording so that they can do costume changes, like when the Good Fairy transforms Cinderella into a beautiful ball gown. That's a jump cut, which means they
That I
had to
was
stop
also
recording.
wondering about because the way that they were setting it up, I was like, okay, well then this is probably some sort of stage magic. But then the dress was so different. I was like, there's no way they could have hidden this dress under the one she was just wearing.
Yeah. Yeah. So what probably would have happened is in a cut bit from the televised version, Julie and Clary's character will have probably have said, because this is for television, she'll go off stage and she'll come on in a nice dress, but don't say anything. And the audience will go, okay. And then he'll steer the wand, they'll stop recording, she'll go get changed, come back out, there'll be that poof of smoke, and she'll be there and he'll be like, okay, everybody, she's transferred, hey! Claps and cheers and all as well. But that was a bit that confused me because I was sort of sitting there thinking, well, if they know that they can stop and start the recordings. I suppose it really is just time constraints. They only have like the theatre space for so long. But if they had that ability to know that they can stop and start the recording, why they didn't just have set drop backgrounds rather than building this giant two-tier set that they have to kind of maneuver around? Because I've been to panto performances now where they basically build a box, a giant box, and they set dress each side of the box to be a different scene. And when a scene ends, the sort of theatre will go dark and some incidental music will start playing. And they'll literally just rotate this box round to the next scene. Set hands will come out and dress the foreground of the set with actual physical props, and then the lights will come back up and the scene will begin again as normal. But it seemed like they didn't want to go down just having drop screens, which, yeah, fair enough. It's probably a higher quality way to do it. But then at the same time, that was just unlocked a memory. Why did they do a fake carriage but a real horse?
I wondered the same thing, because when they said that Buttons was going to be the horse, I was like, okay, well, they're going to turn him into one of those pantomime horses. And I was wondering, well, who's going to be the other half? And then it was a real horse, and I was like, okay, what?
The UK is a silly country. I will say, actually, that was one that genuinely did make me laugh, was towards the end of the pantomime when Buttons is turned back into Buttons and it turns out that he's fallen in love with a horse whilst he was a horse. And there was just one line that made me laugh, which was, "Oh, she'll be here any minute," and you just heard, there she is. Just irreverent humour. That's the joy of pantomime humour, really is. It's a bit of a bait and switch, and it's something that I love and hate in comedy. I love being an outside observer of this type of comedy. I hate being the subject of it, which is where you go into a situation and the cast set up the terms of engagement. They'll tell you the sort of style of comedy they're working with through how they deliver the comedy. They'll sort of set up the plot points, they'll set everything up, and then they drop the floor from you because it actually turns out it's a very self-aware piece. And, you know, they might be hitting you with kind of very surface level jokes, and then suddenly they'll just turn on you and pull the floor out from under you. And it turns out that actually this is an incredibly self-aware piece, and you've been acting as if it wasn't, but it turns out it is. And now you're in for a really bad time because we're going to do jokes at you that you didn't think were coming. And Panto is notorious for that. It will create this nice little bubble of, oh, the comedy's like this and the story's like this. And then about 20 minutes in, they'll suddenly just pop the bubble and just start talking to the audience directly and engaging with people and talking about things that you weren't expecting to even begin to come up. And the humour will just veer off into this bizarre kind of mixture of gross out humour, slapstick comedy, double entendres, adult-oriented jokes. It's like I've said at the start of this cast, you can get away with saying the most horrendous stuff in pantomime as long as you're wearing a funny dress and stood on a slightly elevated stage. Like, if you'd said it out of costume on an eye level with an audience member, you'd get into a fist fight with half the stuff that panto dames say. But because they're on an ever so slightly taller bit of floor than everybody else, they can suddenly say the most horrendous stuff about people, their wives, their kids, their relatives. Just, it's a free-for-all. And that's the thing, that's the big thing with pantomime, is you, as an audience member, you just have to kind of accept that if you're going into that environment, you got to roll with the punches. They might not go anywhere near you. They might not say anything to you. You might be completely left alone for the entire night and just be an observer. It could be that you are suddenly a key character in this production.
That would be my fear, because I would be going in there. I'd want to see it just to see what it's like to be at a pantomime, and then somebody locks eyes on me and decides that I'm the one. And I wouldn't know how to escape.
There was a pantomime I went to in the 90s, and I think it was a Cinderella. It was one of those typical sort of Princess and Prince Charming type setups. And their finale, their big sort of end thing, was Prince Charming got down on one knee to sort of ask the princess to marry him. And one of the ugly sisters piped up and said, "I don't think this is fair. We need to get somebody else in to compare and contrast with." And then they went down into the audience and just found a bloke and pulled him up on stage and had him doing like tests of strength, tests of logic, tests of willingness to see if he could marry Cinderella instead. But but they were all kind of skewed to make it so that he would lose. So like they would ask him like incredibly complex maths questions, but then ask Prince Charming what was 1 + 1. And it was great because my parents went to it on a separate night to myself, and when I went, obviously the guy lost. But on the night my parents went, he won. And the sisters just sort of looked at the scoreboard, looked at him, looked at Prince Charming, and went, "No," and just sent him back to his seat. So Prince Charming wins anyway. It's like, it just like they'd introduce him like, in the left corner, reader of the Palace and the Kingdoms, and generally dashing man, Prince Charming, and on the blue corner, Barry.
But this sounds like perfect humor for me. I would love this. Unless they got me to be Barry. Then I would hate this.
Exactly. I'm exactly the same. I'm perfectly... I love watching it from an outsider. If you involve me in it, it's the worst day of my life. I just don't want to know. And the thing is, even as the crew on these theatrical productions, you're not safe. If you botch a sound cue, or you botch a lighting cue, or you don't drop the screen at the right time, that's it then. You're the target for the rest of the night. The cast are just going to be pointing up to the gantry and saying, "Now get this one right this time." No, right again, do it again. No.
That I would be more okay with as long as I can be up in the rafters and just be the off-screen thing being pointed at.
And another one as well. The thing is, you think, okay, being an audience member is bad. Being a crew member probably isn't great. At least if I'm in the cast, I can control the narrative. I can say what I want to say and steer the story away from things. No, because also what goes on in pantomime is the cast decide to play practical jokes on each other for their own amusement and nothing else. One of the famous ones I remember was in a production of Alice in Wonderland, because Alice in Wonderland is one that also gets adapted to pantomime occasionally. And there was a scene where one of the characters was supposed to literally burst through a door. It was a fake door painted onto a set, and as a bit of a show-stopping moment, one of the characters is supposed to literally burst through this paper door. And what happened was, the day before the show was supposed to start, somebody fitted an MDF panel to that paper door and stuck cling film all over it. So when it came to the bit where he's supposed to burst through the door and say, "Stop what you're doing," he hit the MDF panel and bounced off it. And all that happened from the audience perspective was this wall of set just suddenly jutted forward about 2 inches, and somebody went, "Jesus, ah!" in the back of the sets. Whilst the comedy characters on stage just sort of looked at this door that was supposed to be broken in but wasn't, and sort of shrugged and carried on.
Again, this sounds like something I would like to see, as long as I'm not involved.
Oh, absolutely. There was an anecdote. I think it was Oliver Reed and Peter O'Toole. I can't remember if it was an actual theatrical production or a pantomime, but it was a similar kind of situation. Peter O'Toole and Oliver Reed, notoriously massive drinkers and massive alcoholics. They were doing a production in a local venue where there was a pub about 5 minutes away from the theatre. And there was a point in their play where they had a 20-minute window where they didn't have to be on stage. So what they would do is once they got off stage, they would run 5 minutes down the road to the pub, drink as much as they physically could in 10 minutes, like shots, beers, whatever, and then they'd run back to be there for their cue when the next bit with them involved came up. Well, one night they ran down to the pub and they started drinking and drinking and drinking, and about half an hour went by, and they'd both fallen asleep. They'd drunk too much. And this frantic stagehand bursts into the pub, shakes them both and goes, "You're on stage now!" and drags them out of the pub. And they're both caning it up. And apparently what had happened is on stage, this person had said the cue for Oliver Reed and Peter O'Toole to come on, and they just didn't. These two absolutely wrecked actors suddenly stumbled onto stage. And one of them fell off the stage at one point. Just chaos. The joys of pantomime. Chaos.
This This sounds like chaos. This sounds like the whole point is chaos.
Yes. Well, you've got to imagine in Britain it rains pretty much 362 days of the year. You have fish and chips, beans and chips, or chips and egg, and that is all you get to eat in this country. Nothing gets better. We have prime ministers who successfully have managed to somehow convince the public that every year we should be worse off because we deserve it. So once a year, let's have a little bit of heavily fueled by booze chaos. Why not? Why not torture theatre down for the laughs? It could be great.
I guess it wouldn't surprise me if that was an actual anecdote that you're referencing.
Probably happened somewhere. It's the purest form of farce theatre you will ever probably encounter outside of an adaptation of Naked Lunch. Just absolute unmitigated chaos because it's one of the only theatrical productions I know where the script is optional. Like, you don't have to stick to the... I've had pantomimes where they've gone off script and just then 45 minutes has happened before they've got back to the finale. Just nuts. I mean, I worked briefly on at least 2 productions. I worked backstage on pantomimes, and it's as much chaos behind the scenes as it is in the foreground, because you've got to imagine these costume changes that go on often have to be done scene by scene. So you'll have an actor literally run off set stage left, and then whilst he's walking around the back of the theatre to stage right, somebody is dressing him as he walks so he can walk in on stage right in a completely different costume. And that'll happen literally every other scene. I remember I crewed once for a pantomime adaptation of Mother Goose, which was another one that can be adapted here and there. And the panto dame in that production literally changed costume every single time he was on stage. And that was part of the gag, was that he had an endless wardrobe. So he would literally every single time come in a completely different costume. And it wasn't even recycling bits of other costumes to make the costume. He had a rack of about 20 different outfits. It doesn't help either that he was well over 320 pounds in weight at that point. By the 16th costume change, he had a 5-minute break and he was literally... he looked like an overripe strawberry. He was lying on the stairs of the theatre with an air conditioning unit blasting him, half dressed in one costume, being changed into the other costume and breathing for his life.
I thought you were going to say with an air conditioning unit shoved up his dress.
This is the thing. And just insane. And the thing is, he looked like he was dying. And then at the end of the show, it was like... Yeah, at the end of the show, I sort of said, "Oh, was it a good one?" He went, "Oh, I loved it. It was amazing. We're going to do it again next year." I just thought, mate, you won't live into 50 if you keep doing this. What is absolutely insane? Just crazy. But yeah, the joys of pantomime. I highly recommend, if you don't, to see one at least once in your lifetime. Even if it's a mainstream one. The smaller independent ones tend to be even more chaotic and unusual because, like, the bigger budgeted ones have to kind of follow rules because they don't want to get sued. But small independent companies are usually run by like amateur dramatic societies, and the worst thing that can happen there is like a member gets told not to come back, which that is no barrier to comedy with these people. If you can find an independent panto, go and watch one of those. It's cheap, cheerful, and just bizarre. The big budgeted ones look nicer, but are maybe a little bit safer.
I feel like maybe that's what I should do then, because I would prefer to be more safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I completely agree. In fact, I think they might have announced the pantomime for my area this year. Let's have a look. I'll see which one they're doing this year. I can't remember. Oh, funnily enough, this year they're doing Cinderella.
Oh, okay.
And it's a rugby star is playing buttons, and that's the big draw for the year.
I thought you were going to say a rugby star is playing the stepmother. Which could work.
Yeah, sure, why not? Why not? We're through the
Actually,
looking glass
it's depending
on this one,
on depending on who it was and what they were doing. Anybody could be played by a rugby star, and it would be funny.
Basically. Well, this is the joy of pantomime, really, is that gender knows no name in the world of panto. You can have the burliest, gruffest guy wearing a pretty frock for the entire production. No one bats an eyelid.
Has there ever been a Cinderella that
Almost certainly, almost certainly. And obviously, then you get into like the variations of pantomime. And I think I alluded to this on the last podcast, which is you get things like LGBTQ plus pantomimes, where it's essentially a cross between a pantomime and RuPaul's Drag Race. You get adult pantomimes, which are essentially pantomimes where the double entendres are literal entendres. They they don't mask anything. It's just literally just naughty jokes and swearing for 2 hours, which people like. I personally am not that big of a fan. Um, but yeah, that's the thing when it comes to the variants. There's increasing numbers of variants on pantomimes, but that core premise of just unmitigated chaos is rife through all of them. And it is very much a love-hate thing. You either go and you have a really good time, or you go and you go, well, that was pretty good, but I hope I never see it again. Um,
I feel like this is one of those things where I'm weirdly in the middle. Like everybody talks about things that are like you either love it or you hate it. Like people say that about cilantro. I feel like I'm in the middle. Like I don't love cilantro, but I don't hate it. It's just an odd flavor. And I kind of feel the same way about pantomime, at least so far. It's like I can see why people love this. I can see why people hate it. I don't feel like I love it, but I don't feel like I hate it.
No, and agreed. And I think you hit the nail perfectly on the head when you said that you think an ideal situation would be a more faithful adaptation of the source material, but maintaining some of that irreverent humor,
Hmm.
where it's not just personalities leading the vague idea, the ghost of a story, but it's these personalities being the story.
Yeah.
I think that would work a lot better, but I don't think that there's as much of an appetite for it
I
because
was just gonna
obviously, as you
say,
can
yeah.
imagine,
I can imagine, like, I feel like I would like that better, but then you get to the point where is it even pantomime anymore, or is it just a parody play?
yeah. Well, this is the thing. Pantomime is billed as family entertainment, but realistically, the target audience for pantomime is very, very young children. The more adult-oriented humor is kind of basically the actors offering an olive branch to frustrated parents because they know that they're going to be locked in with chaos for 2 hours. The occasional kind of adult joke or sort of more mature, political comment or something like that is a way to kind of say to the parents, look, we know you're here for 2 hours. Here's something to try and keep you sweet for a little bit, just while we get through the various songs, dances, and audience participation moments that you're going to have to sort of suffer through for the next hour and a half. I don't know. The way in my head, I kind of summed it up best. It would be a bit like if typical pantomime is like one of those kids' TV dinners. The thing that we're suggesting, which is a faithful story that's led with that level of comedy, would be a bit more like the adult version of the kids' TV dinner, sort of like a gourmet option. You're kind of like, these potatoes are exquisite, and I can't wait to enjoy my yogurt. I don't know why I just one of the things I wrote and I put it all in bold is inappropriate humor, chocolate licking Cinderella.
Oh, that, yeah, that was one of those jokes where I was like, what?
Yeah. Followed immediately by why don't we kill the Baroness and throw her
That
rotting corpses to the wolves?
that was one of my favorite parts because then everybody was like into the idea and he was like, you're supposed to be horrified at that idea.
It was especially funny watching the 86 one after the 2000s one because he also says something like 20 years ago you'd all be terrified, and then you watch the one from 20 years previous and they go nowhere near that in that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I suppose what I can say is if you enjoyed these pantomimes, the 2000s version, I think, is the one you're more likely to find stylistically available online. That tends to be how they film and frame it. If you wanted to explore more of them, there's different levels of pantomime as well, depending on which channel is doing it. So ITV are probably the best known. They, like I say, have done them on and off over the years, going back to, I think, the late 70s, maybe even the early 70s. But the BBC have done pantomimes in the past. They tend to do them every few years rather than a regular thing. They also have started capitalizing on that kind of the show that goes wrong style. thing. So they've done
Hmm.
things like the panto that goes wrong, which I don't understand how that works because pantomimes fundamentally work best when they go wrong. So doing a panto called the panto that goes wrong makes it sound like the pantos that go right are the ones that work, when the ones where they go wrong are the ones that work. So I don't know, it's confusing.
Maybe the panto goes wrong. It's just a play.
Basically, you tune in, everything's perfect. Oh, God, yeah, yeah. There's a preschool channel over here called CBeebies, which is aimed at children aged 3 to, well, say 2 or 3 till about 5 or 6 years old. And they do a Christmas pantomime. I think it's semi-annually, but that one's aimed very much at very, very young children. So none of the sort of irreverent humor is as present, and it's all written very much for very young children. And the idea with those was supposed to be to introduce children to the concept of pantomime so that when they actually go to watch a real pantomime, they're not completely just lost, which I think is a really nice thing to do because kids from my generation and older did not get that luxury. We were just tossed headfirst into an adaptation of Peter Pan with a half-cut Captain Hook dragging people on stage to make them walk the plank. Um, honestly, just incredible. Pantomime is a bottomless barrel, my friend. There is no bottom to it. It just goes and goes and goes. I mean, I suppose that's a question really that to ask yourself is, do you feel like American sensibilities and the American culture in general would be accepting of pantomime culture? Or do you feel like it's a bit of a bridge too far for a certain subsection of the population?
It depends on the person. I could see some people would like it. I think the average Midwesterner, which is where I am, probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
I think they would just be either confused or upset.
The average panto going experience. They put that on some of the posters to try and bring people in, you know. It's I was confused and upset, Barry from Nottingham.
I mean, if somebody put that on a poster, that would be more enticing to me to go see something.
I asked them to stop, but they kept hitting me. Dan from. So yeah, in the end of the day, Julian Clary is great, and Cinderella is fantastic. Go and watch a Cinderella.
Depends on the version. I
Yes,
like the 86 Cinderella better than the 2000 Cinderella. The
well,
character-wise.
yeah, no, agreed. I think between the two, I would lean more towards the 2000 Cinderella. It made me very interested to see what Simon Nye wrote for Dick Whittington and Aladdin, because what he wrote here was fairly bob on for the typical panto experience. And I think if this was kind of the middle of the stack, because I think Dick Whittington was the year before this and Aladdin was the year after this, it would be interesting to see how his style developed and where it went and where it came from.
Well, I've already known eventually I'm going to do Aladdin, because, like, a lot of these I'm kind of doing as I go through the Disney versions, like,
Hmm.
because I have a Disney podcast, so I kind of tie things together so I have less to do. I mean, I end up making more for myself sometimes, but like I already knew I was going to do Aladdin, so I'd already had in the back of my mind that I was going to find an Aladdin pantomime. But Dick Whittington and his cat is not a story that I had ever come across my radar until we started talking about pantomime. So I
Hmm.
kind of feel like I should do that one, even if it's just as a one-off, because I'm just curious about that one.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And it would definitely fit the IP of your channel, even though it's not necessarily got an every version ever to pull from. It's predominantly theatrical, but there are a few animated adaptations. It's an all right story. And again, like any panto, it really lives and dies by its cast. So I can't sit here and hand on heart go, oh yeah, you got to watch the ITV Dick Whittington panto. That's going to be great because I haven't seen it. It could be horrendous. But the story itself is generally good. I could recommend checking it out in line with the other sort of fairy tale sort of story adaptations. It's a fun enough little story. It's got nice ideas.
Yeah, I probably will check that one out at some point. I'll probably check out all of them at some point.
Mm.
Probably not right away. I have too many things going on to add a whole new series. But as much as I say that it's a mixed bag, it's not a mixed enough bag that I'm like, I don't want to see anymore. I'm like, I'm more curious about more versions of different stories that have been pantomimed.
Oh yeah, and this is the best part, really. Is like I say, every adaptation is somebody's reimagining, and the
Yeah,
the story is just the launch pad, really. So you could cover 200 different adaptations of Cinderella and find only very minimal overlaps in
yeah.
terms of what they've actually chosen to do with it.
Hmm.
It's the joy of the roll of the dice, because it could be, well, this performance had the best Panto Dames, but this one had the best Cinderella, and this one was the better adaptation of the story, but this one had the best off-kilter humor. There's, to my knowledge, there is no one true, genuine article pantomime adaptation. There's no one Cinderella you can kind of point at and go, that's the one you've got to watch. All the rest are rubbish or only have a few good bits. It's so scattershot. It's part of the chaos, really.
That's kind of what I was thinking, which is why I decided we should probably do two from two different eras, just
Mm.
to get a wider flavor of what it was.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. And what you'll find with pantomimes is the newer the adaptation, the more universal it will be. The more it will kind of not rely as much on deep cut jokes or
Hmm.
stuff that's happened that year, because they value the ability to put it into syndication and play it every Christmas more.
Yeah,
Older adaptations, the policy on retaining stuff in archives for older adaptations was play it once and wipe it, or if it was a bit more basic, they could maybe play it twice and wipe it, because they needed the space in the archive.
hmm,
So the older you go, the more obtuse it will be, which your mileage may vary. If you just like the vibe of pantomime, you could stick one on from 1960 and have a good time.
hmm.
If you actually want to know what the jokes mean, you may have to have Wikipedia open on a separate tab
Yeah.
as you go.
That that's why I didn't care as much for the '86 version the first time around. And even the
Mm,
second time around, the jokes were still, even though I caught more of them, it was only because I was able to focus more on them because I'd already caught certain ones that were I wasn't having to think about. But I would
yeah.
still say the majority of the jokes were still going over my head because, like I said, it was referencing things I didn't understand, people I didn't understand, just a whole lot of era specific humor that was completely going over my head. But I liked
Yeah.
the
No.
performances and I liked the vibe,
Yeah.
which half
No,
the time
absolutely.
I'm watching things for vibes anyway, because I don't know, some things I talk about, it's something like I probably won't watch and rewatch this, but I like the vibe of it.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to as well imagine the context that it plays out in. So this would typically go out either a couple of days before Christmas or on Christmas Day itself. This particular version that you sent me through YouTube played on ITV2, and I believe it was either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. And its function quite literally is they shove it on in the middle of the day so that whilst mum and dad are making the Christmas dinner or sort of clearing up from the carnage that was Christmas morning, the kids will be just quietly squirreled away watching this and hopefully having a good old time doing so whilst they're playing with the toys. It's essentially just festive background fodder.
Yeah.
It's less kind of prime time event television. It's not something that the family all gather around for on an evening and watch it. It's something that kind of just fills the awkward silence between Christmas dinner being served and the presents being opened.
Hmm.
And they normally stack it as well. They'll normally play like two or three of these back to back on those channels. I don't know what the current status is because I haven't watched actual television live probably for about 2 or 3 years now. But at least when I was consciously watching them, they're normally the sort of mid morning to mid afternoon slot on the off brand ITV channels, ITV 2, 3, and 4 would be some variation of Christmas films or pantomimes back to back. So,
Well, we can probably wrap this podcast up. I think we've thoroughly gone off the rails, but the things that we were watching went off the rails. So, we will be back for something else in the future. Probably at some point, more pantomimes. I'm curious about the format now. I kept coming across things as I was researching for this one. I was like, that looks interesting. So I think we'll probably be back for something else like this in the future.
absolutely.
But until then, would you like to let people know where they can find you if they would like more from you?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on. Sorry, I ended up probably making another 3 hours worth of editing for you to cut down. So many offshoots, but that's the nature of Panto. You can find me at TYTD Reviews on YouTube, and I'm also on Letterboxd and Blue Sky. Do go and take a look at what I'm doing. I may be on a break by the time this one comes out, but we should be back in October with a lovely run through of some Halloween movies to set the mood. So yeah, jump over and say hi if you can see me, and thank you once again for having me on.
Okay, well, we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to Every Version Ever. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow my co-hosts as well. My Linktree and all of our links will be in the description below. If you want more of my content, all my podcasts are available on YouTube as well as most podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this show, check out one of the other podcasts or check out my Patreon for bonus and extended episodes you won't find anywhere else. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode, so thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.